4:23 a.m. local time, January 28th. Operators at Israel's Arrow 3 Missile Defense Control Center outside Tel Aviv registered 18 incoming ballistic missile trajectories on their tracking screens. Not unusual in itself. Iranian ballistic missile launches targeting Israeli territory have become almost routine over the past 6 months. What made this particular salvo different, what made the operators in that room flag this launch for immediate escalation to senior command, wasn't the number of missiles. It was the pattern. 17 of the missiles were following standard ballistic trajectories. High apogee, predictable flight path, exactly what Israeli air defense systems are designed to intercept. Those 17 missiles triggered the automated intercept sequence immediately. Arrow 3 interceptors launched. David's sling systems activated for mid-course engagement. Iron Dome batteries positioned for terminal phase backup. Standard procedure. The system working exactly as designed. The 18th missile was doing something different. It was flying lower, maneuvering mid-course, accelerating and decelerating in patterns that don't match ballistic physics. And its trajectory wasn't pointing at Tel Aviv or Haifa or any of the high-value targets Israeli air defense planners have spent 2 decades positioning interceptor batteries to protect. It was pointing at empty desert 40 kilometers south of Dimona. For 190 seconds, Israeli air defense operators watched that 18th missile follow a flight path that made no strategic sense while their systems engaged the 17 that did. When the intercept sequence finished, Israeli defenses had successfully destroyed 16 of the 17 standard trajectory missiles. The 18th missile impacted exactly where its trajectory predicted. Empty desert, no casualties, no infrastructure damage, nothing that would make a rational targeting decision. And that's when Israeli defense analysts started asking a question that nobody had a comfortable answer for. What was that 18th missile testing? That's the question that's been dominating closed-door analysis sessions at Israeli Defense Headquarters for the past 2 weeks, and I'm going to tell you the answer specifically with technical detail in a few minutes. But the answer matters significantly less than what it represents. Here's why. Israel's official statement, released 6 hours after the attack through the IDF spokesperson's unit, described the intercept operation as highly successful and emphasized that defense systems performed as designed with minimal incoming threat penetration. Highly successful. Those 2 words, that's what started the real analysis for me. Not because I think Israel is lying about the intercept rate, the numbers are verifiable and they're accurate, but because of what they chose not to mention in that statement, the cost. 16 missiles intercepted. Each interception required, on average, 2.1 interceptors to achieve kill probability above 90%. That's not speculation, that's documented Israeli air defense doctrine. You don't shoot 1 interceptor at an incoming ballistic missile. You shoot 2, sometimes 3, because the cost of a miss is too high to accept single-shot probability. 16 targets, 34 interceptors expended. Let me tell you something about how missile defense economics work, because this is where the entire strategic picture shifts, and almost nobody covering this story has bothered to do the math. An Arrow 3 interceptor costs approximately $3 million per unit. David's sling interceptors run about $1 million each. In that single engagement, Israeli air defense expended somewhere between $50 million and $80 million in interceptor inventory to stop an attack that, even if every missile had penetrated, would have caused estimated damage in the $10 million to $15 million range based on the targeting pattern. Israel spent $50 million to prevent $10 million in damage. That ratio is the thing that keeps Israeli defense planners awake at night. And the 18th missile, the one that hit empty desert, was Iran demonstrating that they understand the ratio as well as Israel does. Let me tell you what Israeli air defense planning has assumed for the past 15 years, because without understanding that baseline assumption, the strategic problem Iran just created doesn't make sense. Israel's multi-layered air defense network, Arrow 3 for exo-atmospheric intercept, David's sling for mid-course engagement, Iron Dome for terminal phase, was designed around a specific threat model. The model assumed that adversaries, primarily Iran and Hezbollah, possessed limited numbers of precision-guided ballistic missiles and large numbers of unguided rockets. Against precision missiles targeting critical infrastructure, high intercept rates justify high interceptor costs. You spend $3 million to stop a missile aimed at a power plant because the power plant is worth billions, and its destruction cascades into economic damage, far exceeding the interceptor cost. Against unguided rockets targeting civilian areas, lower-cost Iron Dome interceptors at $50,000 to $100,000 per unit provide cost-effective defense because you're protecting population centers, and the political cost of civilian casualties justifies the economic cost of interception. The model works when the adversary has to choose between expensive precision weapons in limited quantities or cheap unguided weapons in large quantities. The model breaks when the adversary has something else entirely. And over the past 8 months, Iranian missile attacks have demonstrated that they have something else entirely. Starting in October 2024, Iranian ballistic missile salvos began including increasing percentages of what Israeli intelligence designated ambiguous trajectory missiles, missiles that maneuver mid-course, missiles that accelerate and decelerate unpredictably, missiles whose targeting solutions aren't clear until terminal phase. These aren't precision-guided weapons in the traditional sense. They're not accurate enough to target specific buildings, but they're not unguided rockets either. They're something in between, accurate enough to hit a general target zone, unpredictable enough to complicate intercept solutions, and critically, they're cheap enough to produce in volume. Iranian production cost for the K-Bar-Shikan medium-range ballistic missile, the primary system demonstrating these ambiguous flight characteristics, is estimated at $300,000 to $500,000 per unit. Let me give you that ratio because it's the entire strategic problem in a single number. Israel spends $2 million to $3 million per interceptor. Iran spends $400,000 per missile. That's a cost exchange ratio of approximately 6 to 1 in Iran's favor. Everyone is asking, can Israeli air defenses stop Iranian missiles? The real question is, can Israel afford to keep stopping them? And those are completely different questions with completely different answers. The first answer is yes. Israeli intercept rates against Iranian ballistic missiles remain above 90% for high-priority targets. The systems work, the technology is proven. Israeli air defense is, by any technical measure, highly effective. The second answer is the one that doesn't have a simple yes or no attached to it. Annual Israeli production and procurement of Arrow 3 interceptors is approximately 30 to 40 units. David's Sling production runs about 60 to 80 units annually. Those numbers are constrained by manufacturing capacity, specialized component availability, and budget allocation. Current Israeli interceptor inventory, according to assessments based on procurement tracking and stockpile analysis, is estimated at roughly 500 Arrow and David's Sling interceptors combined. Iranian ballistic missile inventory is estimated at 2,000 to 3,000 missiles in the categories that require Arrow or David's Sling engagement. Stay with me on this math because it's uncomfortable and precise. If Iran launches sustained missile campaigns at the rate we've seen over the past 6 months, roughly 15 to 25 missiles per week, and if Israeli doctrine continues to require 2+ interceptors per target, Israel expends 30 to 50 interceptors weekly. At that consumption rate, current Israeli interceptor stockpiles last somewhere between 10 and 17 weeks before depletion forces operational changes. 10 weeks. Iranian production capacity for medium-range ballistic missiles is estimated at 40 to 60 units monthly. Iranian stockpiles replenish faster than Israeli interceptor inventory can. That's not a technology problem. That's a mathematics problem. And mathematics problems don't get solved with better engineering. They get solved by changing the equation. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that makes this a strategic inflection point rather than just an operational challenge. Iran doesn't need to overwhelm Israeli air defenses in a single massive salvo. They need to force Israel to spend interceptors faster than Israel can replenish them, and they're succeeding. Let me show you why that 18th missile, the one that hit empty desert, matters more than the 17 that were intercepted. Iranian missile planners are testing Israeli response patterns. They're documenting which missiles trigger intercepts and which don't. They're mapping the decision rules Israeli air defense operators use when allocating limited interceptors against multiple targets. That data allows Iran to optimize future salvos for maximum interceptor consumption per missile launched. Here's how that optimization works in practice. Include a percentage of missiles on ambiguous trajectories that appear to threaten high-value targets during early flight, but resolve to low-value impacts during terminal phase. Israeli air defense can't wait to see where those missiles actually impact. They have to commit interceptors during mid-course based on projected trajectory. By the time the actual impact point becomes clear, the interceptors are already expended. That's what the 18th missile was testing. How long can Iran keep an ambiguous trajectory pointed at a potential high-value target before revealing it's actually aimed at empty desert? The answer, based on that January 28th engagement, is long enough that Israeli defenses committed 0 interceptors to it, which means Israeli operators have already adjusted their engagement rules to avoid wasting interceptors on ambiguous targets, which means Iran has successfully forced Israel to accept some level of non-engagement risk to preserve interceptor inventory. That's not a tactical adjustment. That's a doctrinal retreat from the previous standard of intercept everything that might threaten population or infrastructure. The new standard is becoming intercept what we're confident threatens critical targets and accept some level of risk on ambiguous threats to preserve inventory. Iran forced that change with 8 months of sustained, low-intensity missile campaigns that never rose to the level of existential threat, but consistently imposed interceptor costs that exceeded replenishment rates. $400,000 missiles forcing doctrine changes in a $20 billion air defense system. That's a 1 to 50,000 cost exchange ratio. When you think through the actually executable options, not the theoretical perfect solutions, but the ones possible with current technology and acceptable political costs, you reach a conclusion that is genuinely difficult to articulate. Israel has no good options. Both available paths lead to the same strategic vulnerability, just through different routes. Option 1. Maintain current intercept doctrine and accept inventory depletion. If Israel continues engaging every credible threat with current doctrine requiring multiple interceptors per target, stockpile depletion reaches critical levels within 12 to 16 weeks, assuming current attack tempo continues. When stockpiles reach critical levels, two things happen simultaneously. First, Israeli air defense coverage becomes selective by necessity. Protect Tel Aviv and Haifa and critical infrastructure, accept hits on lower priority targets. That selectivity creates operational vulnerabilities that Iranian planners can exploit by targeting the gaps. Second, Israeli deterrence credibility degrades. If adversaries understand that Israeli air defenses are operating under inventory constraints, the psychological deterrent effect of those defenses diminishes. Hezbollah becomes more willing to launch rocket campaigns. Iranian proxies become more aggressive in testing boundaries. Option 2. Adjust intercept doctrine to preserve inventory. This is already happening. The January 28th engagement demonstrated it. Israeli air defense is becoming more selective about which targets justify interceptor expenditure. But selectivity means accepted risk. Every non-engaged missile that turns out to actually threaten a population center creates a catastrophic political problem for Israeli leadership. The first time a missile hits a residential area because air defense chose not to engage an ambiguous trajectory, public confidence in the defense system collapses. And once public confidence collapses, political pressure forces doctrine back toward intercept everything, which returns to option 1 and inventory depletion. Neither option solves the fundamental problem. Iranian production of missiles outpaces Israeli production of interceptors, and Iranian missiles cost 1.6 what Israeli interceptors cost. The trap isn't that Israeli air defense doesn't work. The trap is that it works exactly as designed, and Iran has figured out how to make that design economically unsustainable. Nobody's talking about the procurement timeline, and the procurement timeline is where this becomes genuinely alarming in a way that the immediate interceptor math isn't. Let's say Israel decided today to solve the inventory problem by dramatically increasing interceptor production. Triple the annual procurement. Go from 40 Arrow interceptors per year to 120. The budget cost is significant but manageable, roughly $250 million annually in additional procurement spending. The timeline is the problem. Arrow interceptor production requires specialized components with long lead times. The rocket motors are produced by a single manufacturer with limited production line capacity. The seeker heads require specialized semiconductor components with 18-month production cycles. The kill vehicles need precision manufacturing with quality control processes that can't be rushed without compromising reliability. If Israel placed orders today for tripled production, the first units from that expanded production arrive 24 to 30 months from now, 2 years. During those 2 years, Israel operates with current production rates trying to sustain stockpiles against continuing Iranian missile campaigns. The math doesn't work. Consumption exceeds replenishment, stockpiles deplete, and by the time the increased production comes online, Israeli air defense is operating in a degraded state that takes additional years to rebuild to previous readiness levels. Here's what genuinely concerns me after running these numbers. Iran doesn't need to know the exact inventory levels or the precise depletion timeline. They just need to maintain current attack tempo and wait. Every month that passes, every salvo that forces interceptor expenditure, moves Israeli air defense closer to the inflection point where inventory constraints force operational compromises. And operational compromises create exploitable vulnerabilities. Iranian missile strategy isn't designed to penetrate Israeli air defense today. It's designed to erode Israeli air defense capability over 12 to 18 months until penetration becomes possible without requiring any change in Iranian tactics. That's a different category of threat than what Israeli air defense was designed to counter. Here's the thing, the final thing, that changes how we have to think about this entire dynamic. Iran isn't trying to win missile exchanges tactically. The knowledge that they're winning economically is doing the strategic work. Israeli defense planners are making different decisions today than they made 8 months ago. Intercept doctrine is being revised, risk acceptance thresholds are being recalculated, budget allocations are being redirected from offensive capabilities to defensive replenishment. Political leadership is being briefed on timelines that show worsening trajectories. Every one of those adjustments represents a strategic victory for Iran achieved without penetrating a single interceptor screen. Iran spent approximately $200 million on missile production and launches over the past 8 months. Israel spent approximately $800 million on interceptors during the same period. That's a 1-to-4 cost exchange in Iran's favor. Sustained over years, that ratio becomes strategically decisive regardless of intercept success rates. The most expensive thing Iran's missile strategy is destroying isn't Israeli infrastructure. It's the economic sustainability of Israel's air defense model. And that model, once compromised, doesn't get restored with better technology or increased budgets. It gets restored by changing the fundamental assumptions about what missile defense can and cannot achieve against adversaries with deep missile inventories and favorable cost ratios. Israeli defense planners are being forced to recalculate those assumptions right now. Not because the systems failed, because the systems worked exactly as designed, and the design assumptions didn't account for an adversary willing to lose every tactical exchange as long as the economic exchange favors them strategically. That recalculation is happening in real time. The missile that hit Empty Desert on January 28th was Iran's way of demonstrating they understand the calculation as well as Israel does, and that they're willing to keep forcing Israel to spend until the math becomes unsustainable. The recalculation isn't complete yet, but the trajectory is clear, and nobody has figured out how to change it.